We are going to continue our discussion on grid mod and markets. Everyone grab a seat, please. Mike Kurtz, have a seat. Unruly folks, you know. That's why I say I don't like anybody. I'm kidding. I like everybody. I like everybody in this room. I'm just joking. I'm just joking. I like to joke. Really like to joke. I'm a joker. I know. Okay. Good. Well, welcome back, actually. It's not afternoon yet. Welcome back. We are going to continue our markets discussion. Very briefly, though, we do have a special guest in the room. I wanted to recognize Commissioner John Coleman from the great state of Pennsylvania, who has joined us today to spend some time with us in Ohio. So, John, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman.
You're most welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, we have a wonderfully distinguished panel. Let me introduce them and then let them get right to their presentations. First up, we will have Matt Wheatley, who's the Vice President for Sales and Commercial at Direct Energy. Matt White, who we're familiar with here in the state. He's the General Counsel, Regulatory and Legislative Affairs for IGS Energy. And Dan Shields. Dan is a former beloved commission staffer at the PUCO, now with the Ohio Consumers Council, Director of Analytical Services. Gentlemen, welcome. Matt, we'll begin with you.
Thank you. So, Chairman Hart, members of the Commission, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited about Power Forward. And Chairman, I heard you say you have your disruptor hat on this morning and you're fired up. That sounds great. As Chairman introduced me, I'm Matt Wheatley. I work for Direct Energy. We're part of the Centrica Group. Centrica are a 206-year-old company that continues to innovate. At any point, any day, we roll between 5,000 and 15,000 trucks into people's homes and businesses, fixing stuff, as well as providing wholesale energy, retail energy, and competitive choice. The piece of the business I run is Centrica Business Solutions. I want to talk about some of that today. We heard this paradigm shift a lot today around we are in a new world. And I'm going to touch on some of this shortly, where we're moving away from top-down energy supply, or a linear fashion as the prior panelists described it, and much more to having consumers in control of their energy, of their assets, and their choices. And the Commission is asking really great questions around how do we facilitate and enable that customer choice without picking winners and losers, which is a great question. With that type of discussion, there's a lot of buzzwords, and I've thrown some up on a slide here. With only 15 minutes, I'm sure I won't demystify all of these, but I will try and touch upon some of these and point out how some of these topics are very, very relevant to what we're talking about. Within this modern world, customers have a lot of new abilities they didn't have before. They can track and manage their energy in real time. Beyond a meter, beyond the point of the meter, there are real-time sensors that customers, including organizations, can monitor everything they use. They can produce their own energy on site, whether it's renewable or flexible or baseload. They can store their own energy. They can sell it to the grid, and they can help smooth the grid out. To steal a quote I heard just recently, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think, by the sounds of what the Commission is trying to do is to make sure that Ohio gets more of the future right now, because there's a tremendous amount of innovation available. If I think about what am I to ask, and I'll summarize some of these as we go through, but it's really a modern grid infrastructure. The utility has an incredible part to play in this. Hearing some of the prior panelists talk about the traffic cop, it was fascinating to me. Chairman, you raised the issue about a trust question. When I hear a participant looking to be both the traffic cop, but also perhaps be a race car driver at the same time, that was a fascinating dynamic for me. The second thing is, how do you clear the playing field and allow any innovator, any technology participant to get involved and actually push forward more benefits of digitization, because it's a huge trend, and it's a trend that's been happening for a while. If I think through my next slide, and the panelists and the Commission have touched on this, We are in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution, and it's changing everything. Just to tap into a couple of those buzzwords I promised I would. I think about Airbnb. Airbnb is a hospitality company that owns no properties, and yet it's worth roughly the same as the Hilton and Hyatt chains combined. I think about Uber, and we talked about the Uberization earlier today, or about Tesla. Both very different participants in the travel industry, and yet both have a higher market cap than the Ford Motor Company. Who will be the energy titans in 5 to 10 years' time? Who knows? It could be Deborah from the prior panel, it could be Amazon, it could be Direct Energy and Centrica. But it's going to be a fascinating market ahead. And so I think about, where do we start? As someone who serves millions of customers around the globe, including over 5 million customers in North America, we care about our customers. We don't have a security net. We don't have a rate base. A customer invites us into the home every time to either provide that service or fix something, and if we don't do a good job, we won't get invited back. So we asked them, out of respect for the panel, I'm forward showing you some interesting things. So we did a study with our customers. We spoke to 850 decision makers and influencers in businesses and organizations about energy in the broadest topic, and we're going to release the report publicly in about 8 weeks. But I want to just show you some of the statistics that came out, because talking to customers is crucial, because this is what this is all about. So the first one here, 88% of businesses view energy as a key priority. I think about that's a key statistic. 76% of businesses want to innovate in energy. 66% are concerned about managing that complexity. And 33% of them are actively managing that as part of their innovation and their view towards sustainability. So businesses, in the absence of a market structure and in the absence of the utility kind of spoon-feeding a service, are looking at this because it's core to their business. And a lot of this comes up around resiliency. And let me talk about resiliency just a little bit. Grid infrastructure and resiliency can be solved at a number of levels, and that includes, and I'm going to show you a few ways that customers can use technology that exists today but isn't necessarily evenly distributed in a really kind of key way. When we talked to customers about the resiliency that energy provides to their business, 22% of organizations said it damaged their brand. And that includes businesses we spoke to in Ohio, that when the power goes out and they have to throw away pharmaceuticals that they've been processing, or when the power goes out and that puts question marks over running a hospital or a hotel or a treatment center, or if there's a voltage fluctuation and my lab results or my sophisticated machinery has issues in terms of confidence in results or process or even damages the equipment, these are really interesting comments. And it's not just around those brands of those companies that are operating in Ohio that they're trying to move forward. It's around individual customer relationships. Over a quarter of companies felt it damaged individual relationships, and actually about a fifth of companies said it resulted in energy failures, caused questions around life safety either to customers or employees. So these are really important points that if I think about this, Ohio has a phenomenal grid, but the weather continues to happen. I flew in a couple of days ago from Jersey. My home is in the PSEG territory in New Jersey. Yesterday, my neighborhood got 20 inches of snow and my home is without power. If we think about some of the hurricanes that have happened recently and how many kind of billion-plus-dollar storms the federal government has been tracking, these are things that are really happening. And I think we saw that in Ohio when Hurricane Ike came through. I was talking to a colleague last night over dinner that said during that period they were without power for 8 days. But the good news is technology is here that can actually help support that. As I said, Ohio has a fantastic grid, but it's not without its challenges. In 2016, there were 184 outages in Ohio. At state level, that's the fourth highest in the country. Now, it's not to say that every shutdown is one of those kind of 4-day or 8-day power delays. It could be a voltage fluctuation. It could be a 1-minute outage. It could be a 1-day outage. The effects are different. But when it comes to a company's brand and their process and the security of their patients or their students or their customers, these things matter. And that said, companies who implement a strong energy plan, they get the benefits. A lot of customers come to companies like ours. We are a financial ally of the Department of Energy's Better Buildings initiative, which means that we're willing to finance and own and operate energy consuming or producing assets within that building. And outside of those financial and economic returns, which are plentiful for the businesses, as well as those resiliency benefits, there are some of the benefits I've shown on site. Just this week, we were approached in Jersey by a bank, a very traditional bank that operates in Manhattan, that's looking to build a campus in New Jersey. And one of the things it wants to talk to us about is how can we, as part of our employee value proposition, make it a modern campus? How can we have solar canopies, EV charging stations? How can we produce our own energy on site? And if the power goes out, our campus continues to work. And they view that as part of their employee value proposition to attract talent to work there. And I found that really compelling. Just this week, my team, working with some industry partners, did a ribbon cutting in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where the city of Bridgeport is building a microgrid. And we just completed and successfully opened phase 1. And that's another kind of key point I'm going to signpost. So I mentioned microgrids. Well, what else is key? Well, if I think about the centralized energy linear model that's existed previously, there are so many technologies out there that exist, and companies like our own and many other kind of respondents and panelists are building as well. I think about storage, on-site generation, whether that's cogeneration or standby generation, whether that's renewables, including wind and solar, as well as microgrids. And a microgrid, we talked to the commission, my colleague Tom Hawes did in March last year, around what is a microgrid. We've got many kind of great examples what that means, but it doesn't necessarily mean the utility is building generation, but is having the right level set so customers can solve their own issues around thermal requirements, around electricity reliability, about hitting their own renewable and sustainability goals, and making sure it's a business or a hospital or a university that people want to attend and participate in. I think about how we're choosing to participate as a direct energy business and Centrica Business Solutions. We believe we can bring a lot to the table, and we are using our capital and our innovation and our need to compete to survive and flourish and grow to good effect. If I think about the traditional supply management, we offer phenomenal services around wholesale power and gas, power supply, gas supply, and energy procurement, and we are using innovation that we are spending millions of dollars from a research and development perspective on, millions of dollars of capital in terms of acquisitions, and a huge amount of annual operating expenditure of recruiting and hiring new talent around the services on the right, and that includes demand response and load management, energy insights, and that's Internet of Things enabled. I promised I'd cover Internet of Things. We have a device that's a sensor that is wireless and self-powered. We can put on any energy consuming load, tag that device, describe to our cloud system what that is, and those sensors will produce and pulse data every 15 seconds to a bridge that goes to our cloud, and we spend our energy expertise and infrastructure helping the customers understand what that means. So we've helped customers recently say, did you realize you have a policy in this factory of not charging your forklift trucks during peak hours? When we monitored it, guess what's happening? We also did more complex things around, we can see from learning about this device that this rooftop unit isn't behaving properly. We think that's indicative of a breakdown. You should schedule some maintenance ahead of that breaking down. And you think about all the things those energy insights provide a customer around what's really happening in their business or their process, where they can benchmark, they can benchmark production lines, they can benchmark factories, and they can benchmark their activities and set a data-driven benchmark about what else they might choose to do to hit their energy, environmental, sustainability, or resiliency goals by adding some of these other things I've talked about in terms of solar or storage or power generation or combined heat and power. And as I said, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're not looking for ratepayers to pick this up. We're not looking for commission incentives. We think this market is happening and evolving, and the technology is there. And we're really doing three things. So the first is Centrica Business Solutions, so my division that brings those behind-the-meter solutions directly to customers, tailored to exactly what they want. We're putting a huge amount of investment there. We've also started an innovations hub where we're using our own capital to help socially minded, energy-minded businesses thrive and get that seed capital or startup capital. And we're also investing a very significant amount of capital into connected home. So we have our own thermostats, which in certain jurisdictions, including the UK, outsell competitors like Nest and Amazon. You know, we've got a lot of connected devices that we're putting our research into, and we're evolving. What else are we doing? Blockchain. So one of the questions I promised I'd cover was around blockchain. So a very kind of topical, innovative topic that people ask questions around. So a couple of things around blockchain. Blockchain was actually invented almost 10 years ago now, but it's only more recently with computing power and some of the use cases evolving where people are being really innovative about this. But let me tell you what blockchain isn't. Blockchain and cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, they're not synonymous. And I often get asked that by regulators in many areas. Blockchain is a ledger-driven technology that helps keep an independent, objective record that's verified, often in real time, by other computers to keep that kind of peer-to-peer or distributed ledger. Excuse me, hit the microphone. That ledger application can have many ways of getting to the market. Some people choose to say, well, that could be the basis of a currency, a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. And a lot of people are choosing to speculate on Bitcoin and invest in that. I have no view on that. I've seen how volatile it is. I'm no currency expert. Our participation is not that, so put that to one side. The other application is to say, well, if this is a application and just a ledger technology that keeps independent records, and I can track in a very kind of clear way how it settles, well, another application is effectively a billing mechanism. And saying, okay, well, we'll turn these into energy tokens, and behind the meter, in, for example, a microgrid, participants who either produce that power locally or consume that power locally can use it as a ledger just to keep track of who bought and who sold. So an example of a company doing that is LO3. Siemens, our own company, as well as Braemar Capital and others have invested in LO3 to say, this is interesting. They've got a pilot project in Brooklyn, in New York, looking at microgrid, and they're using that technology to settle it. And we aren't just looking at blockchain as a way of doing local energy. There are other ways. So in Cornwall, we talked to you exactly a year ago today, almost to the week, around we wanted to do a project in the UK, in my own division, around a local energy market to solve some of these distribution energy networks. And that was an idea 12 months ago. Now, a year later, we've got 300 homes registered for that, and 124 businesses, including some very kind of old traditional businesses like farms and cottages, as well as some modern ones like surf shops and coffee shops that are buying some of the technology I talked about earlier and using that to produce for their own needs as well as selling to that community on a local basis. So these innovations are happening now and are available now in real time, and we're demonstrating that. Just in terms of a couple of closing comments as I keep an eye on my time, distribution is the platform, it's not the product. And a lot of the commissioners know Teresa Ringenbach, our regulatory person, very well. And her iPhone is on the right and mine is on the left. It's the same iPhone, but how we use it is totally different because we've chosen to personalize it. So as you can tell, my interests include golf and the news and soccer. And Teresa likes baseball, coffee, and some really odd applications. I'm not going to ask you to explain what they are. But the point is, if we swapped our iPhones, which ostensibly are exactly the same, both of us would be remarkably unhappy. And what's interesting about that is, the iPhone, the app fits the iPhone doesn't fit the app. So in terms of roles and responsibilities, I'm seeing a world where the utility, who we need, sets that platform, sets the rules, and allows any app creator, whether it's us or Amazon or Just Energy or any participant, say, as long as you conform to these aspects, build whatever you choose to risk your own capital on. And if customers choose it, then fantastic, you will flourish. And if they don't, there's no safety net, but that's okay in the spirit of innovation. What does that look like? I'm not going to go through all these asks, but these are just some high-level points. But the highest level point is, as an innovative company that rolls physical supply trucks, that creates technology, that supplies energy, do we see a role for the utility? Yes, we absolutely do, because there's that common platform that we all need to integrate and work with. And we need that electric utility as well as the gas utility to do a number of different things, including setting appropriate times around interconnections and allowing us to move really, really fast to bring that future technology here in Ohio for that resiliency and employee value proposition. We need them to do a lot of things, but we don't need them to pick winners or losers or reward or show any bias. We don't need them to grow capability behind the meter or own generation. Why should the ratepayers kind of backstop that? Why wouldn't you let consumers or customers or market participants, if they want to spend their capital on that technology, have the level playing field? So, to Chairman's point earlier, the Commission and the audience are so familiar with a lot of the concepts. I'm not going to read all these bullets, but just in closing, I mentioned a couple of key points. One is the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. The weather and modern technology offer us a yin and yang around. The grid is under constant threat, but we can use technology to increase it. And consumers and companies like us can do that by going behind the meter and funding and designing and building either microgrids or on-site generation or other technology that customers can use. And the role for the utility is to allow us to integrate that into utility if they want to buy back and use some of that generation on site and buy that into the grid, then that's fantastic. And that's really it. So thank you for letting me present it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the members of the the commission for allowing me to present here today. I'm presenting. I'm General Counsel, Regulatory Affairs for IGS Energy. Just to go over a few things about IGS before we start. IGS is a company based in Dublin, Ohio, so right here in Ohio. We have over 1 million customers, about 2.5 million residential customer equivalents, which includes our commercial and industrial load throughout the country. We have approximately 800 employees, most of which are here in Ohio. And we're in a lot of businesses. We sell gas, retail gas and electric. Those are what we call our core businesses, but a lot of our merging businesses are the solar, the CNG, refueling, home warranty, combined heat and power, energy efficiency, a number of others. And a lot of those businesses are the businesses that we're discussing today. And how do we get these businesses and these products in the hands of consumers? And I'm going to get a little meta here. And I think we talk a lot about what we want to do. We want to do this. We want to do that. We need to do this. But I think sometimes we forget why we're here. What is our purpose? What is the utility? What is the utility commission? And what is that role? And to break it down in the most basic form, utility service typically is an essential service. And it's established because it's a market where there's high barriers to entry. And this is an important term because I'm going to come back to this. Utility service is typically exists in a market where there's a natural monopoly. And what a natural monopoly market means is new entrants. Once there's an initial entrant, it's impractical for another market participant to come in and participate in that market. That's the core of why we have utilities, is because typically competition doesn't develop on its own in a natural monopoly market. And as part of a utility, there's a regulatory compact. And that compact is the utility is a monopoly provider of service, but their prices are regulated. They typically get cost recovery plus a reasonable rate of return, but they're capped at how much they can earn, but they're also capped they're capped in that they get their costs recovered. So that's why we have a utility. So when we think about monopolies, most goods and services are procured through competitive markets. In our society, if you think about your your food or your gasoline, your insurance, that's a competitive product. That's typically how we transact business. Typically, monopolies are illegal. So, that's why we have antitrust laws. That's how we, back in the early 1900s, they began busting up the monopolies for gasoline and other products and services and steel. Typically, they're illegal. But in select instances, the state allows the provisions of goods and services through a monopoly provider. So, I'm going to grab my notes here. So, in our society, generally, monopolies are disfavored as a way to procure goods and services. And there's a reason why. Because concentration of market power is bad for customers, and I think that's why we're all here is for the customer and try to figure out what is best for the customer. There's limited innovation when you have an extreme concentration of market power. There's often regulatory capture, and it's less customer focused because there's no need to actually go out and acquire a customer because you already have a captive customer. So there tends to be less customer service oriented businesses. And it's truly difficult to set a true market price through regulation. The rate making process is resource intensive. We've all been through rate cases here. Just to set one single price, there's often weeks of litigation, lots of lawyers involved. That's not the most efficient way to set prices when you actually have a market and a marketplace can do that. Rates typically aren't responsive to demand, and there's little incentive to reduce costs in a rate-making environment where the cost recovery, where an entity gets effectively cost recovery absent gross negligence. So, and I promise you I did not coordinate with Commissioner Freeman while I'm doing my slides, but I think we really do need to have a test when it comes to what utility service should be provided, and I think it should be a natural monopoly test. Is a service that is an essential service, right? So, food is an essential service, but it has to be more than just an essential service. The barriers to entry are so high once that service is provided that a new market entrant is impractical after the first mover. I think that is when we're thinking about how do we determine what service a utility provide. It really has to be going back to the purpose of having utilities to begin with. It has to be, is this a service that is a natural monopoly? It exists in a natural monopoly market. I don't think that it should be a service that's new or experimental should be justification alone of having a utility. And when I mean utility, I mean a utility that gets cost recovery through rate base. Just because it's new or experimental doesn't create justification alone to have a utility provide that service. And I want to just kind of touch on the concept of jump starting a market. We've heard a lot about we need a utility to go in and create EV charging stations or deploy batteries for customers to jumpstart that market because there's no batteries or not enough EV charging stations or batteries in some people's minds. I think what that does is it jumpstarts the market for the utility, but it really pushes back the market for all other participants in the market. So what you get after your pilot program is that you have a market where the utility has a head start, but folks like IGS or Direct Energy or other participants in the market, they don't have that advantage of already having that customer acquisition, and it's going to be a lot more difficult for those participants to offer the same product in the market. So I think it's a misnomer to say that you're just jump starting a market simply by putting out a newer innovative product through the utility rate base. And I just want to give an example, and we've talked a little bit about batteries here today. When you, for instance, and we talked about frequency regulation as well. IGS, one of the businesses we have is smart water heaters. So we install smart water heaters, and a lot of it's in apartment complexes, and we use that product to bid into the frequency regulation market. So if the Utilities Commission or the utility was interested in jump-starting the battery market by building out batteries, in that market, the frequency regulation market is not a very large volume market. It's a very slim market. So once you use a rate-based product to bid into a market that is a competitive market, it reduces the revenues where we can earn on the smart water heaters. So what that means is that why would IGS install smart water heaters in the home if there's no revenue to participate in the frequency regulation market? So there's always these unintended consequences. Another example is we install CNG stations, right? So let's jumpstart the EV market. Well, that has the effect of the demand on customers that adopt CNG. So I think it's easy to have these concepts of, oh, we need to be doing this, or we should be doing that, or customers need this. But the reality is, I think that should come from the customer and not necessarily from the regulatory construct. On to the next slide. So competitive services should not be provided by the utility. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. I mean, I think truly that's what we believe. We think that the utility has a role in offering competitive services through a affiliated company. I think that is where the playing field is level, but not through the distribution company. And at the end of the day, it's harmful to customers because all customers have to pay for a service that they may or may not use. And I just want to use EV charging stations as an example. You know, I heard somewhere there's 5,000 EV electric vehicles in Ohio. So 5,000 customers actually use that product, but 4 million customers have to pay for it. The same with a microgrid. Microgrid is by definition is designed to serve a very small subset of customers. All customers have to pay for it, but only a few customers benefit. And the other reason why it's bad for customers is because customers assume the risk of the investment and not the utility. So even if the investment in batteries doesn't earn a return through frequency regulation markets, that's on the customer. That's not on the investor in the product, where that's not the case for competitively invested products. And also it's bad for competition. It's bad for markets. Vertical market power is real, and it does have a harmful effect on markets. And that's going back to why natural monopoly service is disfavored. It stifles the development of competitive markets. And just going back to the example of water heaters, but if you have other developers of batteries that want to install in customers' homes to ensure reliability, that extra guarantee of reliability for the customer. Let's say the utility puts in a battery in front of the meter, right, that all customers have to pay for. That pushes out the demand for the batteries behind the meter that are driven by the private market. So there's always these unintended consequences. And then at the end of the day, you may like add a few products and services for a select set of customers by jump-starting the market, but you limit customers' options over the long run because the market does not develop for these products and services. And one of the things I want to mention is that, IGS has many businesses. We're offering many different products and services to customers. Some of them we're offering in Ohio, some of them we're not. Some of them we're offering more in, for instance, solar. We're offering more solar out in the East Coast, the West Coast, because that's where the prices are higher, that's where the demand is. We're developing solar in Ohio, but not nearly to the degree because that's what the market demands. So we don't always have to have all the products and services we're talking about in this market today, right now, because maybe the market's not there for it yet. And it doesn't mean it won't be, but if the wrong decisions are made, there could be unintended consequences that could hurt the development of the market. So going back to utility service, I truly believe we really need to think of it as, is this a natural monopoly service? And when I think of natural monopoly service, I think lines, wires, and pipes that go into our homes. I think very few people will dispute that those are natural monopolies today. but technological innovation erodes the justification for natural monopolies over time. Before telecom was a natural monopoly industry, that no longer is the case. Before electric generation was viewed as a natural monopoly industry, and as we've seen in Ohio, we've proven that electric generation can also be a competitive business. So going back to what we think competitive services should be, it should be anything behind the meter. I know we've talked about behind the meter, in front of the meter, but I truly believe that behind the meter services are competitive services, because they're not the same. Every customer is not the same. So not every customer wants a smart thermostat, but those are competitive services. Any service that is not truly essential, like an EV charging station, it's nice to have, but at the end of the day, it's not essential. We have, and I'll give you another example. IGS is put through Smart Columbus. We put out a product that if they enroll with us for electricity, we're going to install a EV charging infrastructure in their customer's home, right? So some customers may love that. We don't think that's going to be a huge product for us, but some customers might like it. But that is a competitive service. That is not a service that that should be rate-based through the utility. And I think it's important to remember that any service that can be effectively provided by more than one participant in the market, you know, there will always be economies of scale that we talk about as justification to saying, okay, well, you know, the utility has all the data, all the information, so why not just let them install batteries in customers' homes? I don't think that's really the reason why we should allow for participants to participate in the market. It should be, can someone else also install a battery in someone's home? Can someone else also provide a microgrid to the customer through a competitive market? Can someone else provide, you know, behind the meter generation? So, just as an example of, you know, what I think is truly utility services, is distribution system that is essential to deliver commodity to customers. And going back to the pipes, lines, wires, substations, transformers. Note, I did not put batteries, even if you put it in front of the meter. Because again, you have these unintended consequences. Once we have a battery, we're going to want to bid it in frequency regulation. You know, is the battery intended to create extra reliability that, you know, that if a customer needs that extra reliability because they relied on their business, they'll go get a battery or a backup generation on their own property. And in the competitive services or any other services that are not integral to the provision of distribution service, which includes distributed generation, batteries, microgrids, smart appliances, home warranty, lighting, EV charging station, and the numerous products and services that will be invented that I can't even think of right now. So that is all I have, but I'll be happy to answer any questions when the time comes.
Thank you, Dan.
And this is for the slide, correct? Thank you. Okay, as most of you know, I'm Dan Shields, the Director of Analytical Services for the Office of the Ohio Consumers Counsel. The Ohio Consumers Counsel is the state representative for 4 million residential utility consumers. OCC represents consumers before the PUCO, the Ohio Supreme Court, the Ohio General Assembly, and FERC. Our URL and contact information is also listed here. I'd like to thank you for allowing the PUCO to present its consumers' perspectives on distribution system, competitive markets. It's been a long time since I've been here, and last time I was, I think most of us were all working together, which, by the way, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your introduction earlier, and I consider it an honor and privilege to work with all of you. It was a great time. Thanks.
Thank you.
OCC's general consumer principles for electric service include that electric service should be affordable, reliable, and safe for all consumers. These principles have worked to the benefit of consumers for decades and should continue to do so for decades to come. OCC believes that markets, instead of monopoly, should be used to drive innovation and lower prices for consumer benefits. Electric grid charges for utility investments should be based on long-standing rate-making standards for consumer protection, including prudency reviews, whether services are used and useful in the provision of service, and whether services and charges are just and reasonable. Power Forward offers the PUCO an opportunity to promote competitive services through the use of the electric utilities distribution system. The PUCO should adopt policies to promote a level playing field for all who provide competitive services to consumers. Policies should be developed by the PUCO to protect monopoly distribution customers from subsidizing any competitive service. Behind-the-meter services include, among other products, wind, solar, and storage. OCC believes that competitive markets will result in more innovation and lower prices to consumers than a monopoly environment. OCC also believes that the PUCO should avoid a transfer of competitive risk to monopoly customers. A utility should only provide competitive services, if at all, through an unregulated affiliate relying upon shareholder funding. Any utility competitive undertaking needs to occur through a structurally separate company established at the parent or holding company level. OCC believes that markets work best for consumers without subsidies. OCC believes that utility monopoly grid services to competitors should be charged on a cost of service basis. OCC maintains that utility grid services should be provided on a non-discriminatory basis. That is, if a utility provides after-the-meter services, that unregulated shareholder-funded company referenced earlier must purchase services from the same tariff under the same terms and conditions as its competitors. Regarding net metering services, the OCC maintains that the PUCO should ensure that net metering customers pay their fair share for using the grid, and also that net metering providers receive fair compensation. We also believe that the PUCO should question or investigate in the long term whether net metering generation should be compensated in the wholesale market, and utilities and their distribution customers should be removed from the compensation process for net metering services. Concerning time of use rates for customers, the PUCO should require market-based time of use rates be made available as an option to those customers who voluntarily choose to participate. Time of use rates cost savings can be realized by all customers by shifting and reducing generation peak demand as a result of customer behavioral change encouraged by time of use programs. The PUCO should encourage time of use rates that are simple to understand and can provide an opportunity for cost savings to Ohioans. Ultimately, however, competitive markets should determine what products and services are available to consumers. Also, because time of use programs can be complicated and difficult to understand for consumers, the PUCO should enact a prohibition on telemarketing and door-to-door sales of these programs. In conclusion, OCC believes that markets, not monopolies, should drive innovation and lower prices for consumer benefits. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, thank you for having me.
I almost had to jump in even before Matt was done to ask a question of Dan Shields and Matt Wheatley. As you were describing your philosophy, Matt White, the example that came to mind as you were discussing your philosophy was first the fast chargers that we heard about yesterday, and secondly batteries at substations, which came up yesterday and I think again today. And focusing on the second one, permit me to lead this for just a moment. I imagine that you would be, and Dan, you would be in favor of allowing utilities, or you believe it would be appropriate for them to install batteries at substations to accomplish capacity advantages and reliability advantages in comparison to what the cost would be for installing larger capacity elements in the distribution network, like transformers and conductors, things of that nature. Is that the case, that you would agree that that could be a logical, appropriate thing for them to do?
And thank you for the question. That's a very good question. I think that my biggest concern is the participation of the batteries in generation markets, or
Right,
generation-like markets like frequency regulation.
Right.
I think it has a lot of negative consequences.
I understand that, but it seemed to me to be a no-brainer that from just a distribution network planning and operations and investment standpoint, we'd be better off having the utilities use batteries at substations where the cost-benefit analysis shows that it costs customers a third of the amount that the alternative of upgrades to transformers, conductors, whatever other devices would be installed. So once we have the batteries out there, Matt and Dan, and I assume that you, Dan, you would be in favor of distribution system improvements that are, in my example, to achieve the same capacity and reliability results are a third the cost of the alternative. You'd say you should take the lower cost path to do it.
I
right?
have a several part answer to that.
Yeah, but I'm sure you would say yes to that. So my question, let me get to my question, which is probably obvious at this point. If we're going to have these batteries out there, these assets out there in the network which are serving these other, obvious, and my premise is that it is obvious, these obvious good customer beneficial purposes, is it your position, Matt, or would your philosophy lead you to conclude that the frequency response benefits of the asset should be left fallow, or should it be used?
Well, first of all, I will.
If it could be used, how would you suggest it be used?
Sure, and I can address that. I want to be careful at assuming that the battery would be the cost-effective way to meet the distribution needs. One of the things that I've found in utility rate cases is that often assumptions are made that are not always the most realistic assumptions.
I mean, I'm assuming, Matt,
So-
that it is. If it isn't, then it isn't. They
Okay.
shouldn't be doing it.
But assuming that's the case, I fundamentally disagree with using a distribution resource to engage in a competitive energy market. It truly does have effects on the investment in competitive services. If you allow a regulated entity that gets cost recovery, regardless of whether it's an economic investment or not, it gets cost recovery. It pushes out investment in competitive markets, and I think the smart water heater example is a great example. Is that we have to make that decision every day. Do we install, in this apartment complex, do we put in this device, which and it needs to earn a return on its investment for us to make a decision. You will displace competitive generation resources. You'll displace competitive battery resources, in people's homes. By allowing the distribution utility and the distribution infrastructure to participate in the competitive markets.
Well, I respect the purity of your philosophy, but I have some concerns about the on the ground consequences of following it in that example. And so, Dan, I pose the same question to you. Do you think we should leave in the example the frequency regulation benefits that are possible from using that asset, which is already cost benefit justified for the capacity and reliability purposes, leaving them fallow and not using them?
Okay. Obviously, OCC doesn't object to deploying a cost savings measure that enhances and promotes reliability. It's a very slippery slope. We're now talking about customer-funded generation participating in wholesale markets. Where do you draw the line where it just is entering the market later as a profit, under a profit motive incentive?
That is the question. So because of the fear of crossing that line down the road, do we not allow the deployment for the capacity and reliability purpose up front?
At a minimum, Commissioner, with all due respect, I would maintain if the customer built the battery, the customer receives all the benefits of the revenues from the wholesale markets to offset its costs.
Commissioner Conway, may I provide some thoughts on this topic, which is a fascinating one?
And I didn't mean to keep you out of it. These other two participants, they're kind of in our, you are too, but they're local and they're in our proceedings. The two of them have been in our proceedings individually in many cases.
Sure. Yeah, let me comment on that. Direct Energy has a very strong local presence in Ohio. We serve about 10% of the eligible choice market in Ohio, which includes about 50,000 businesses, and those businesses and organizations provide goods and services across Ohio. We employ about 300 people in the state. I'd love to employ more. And some of our brands include, Airtron, Mr. Sparky, Benjamin Franklin, like people who are employed and work in Ohio. So, yeah, I feel very, bullish on Ohio. And if I may, just to suggest another construct on that, what I'd say is this: if the utility says in this area, instead of a substation, we have these parameters, and what we'd like to see is in these operating hours, we'd like this much capacity increase or reduction, we'd like this much load behavior. Another construct could be the utility goes out to the market and says, this is the problem, solve it. Use your capital, allow the market to solve that, either by asset production or load response or customer participation, and gets a contracted qualified benefit to hit the need that you wanted to design that battery for in the first place. And if that company makes or loses money on the difference, then that's not on the rate case. And I'll give you an example. In New York, there are certain areas of Con Edison, like the Columbus Circle, like Hudson, like Brooklyn and Queens, where instead of saying, well, there's a 40 billion substation that's needed, there's a desire to defray that capital and save the rate base from buying it. And they've gone to the market to say, well, what else could you do? If we were trying to solve these operating parameters, maybe it is a battery, to your point, and maybe a third party would bid in, and the utility would get the lowest cost, reliability, and operating performance for that substation without having to worry about this question of gravitating into it. So I'd ask you, Commissioner Conway, is there an appetite to maybe change the dynamic of saying, rather than work assumptions 1, 2, and 3, which is it's a battery, it's at the substation, the utility owns it, then is it fallow? You could back those assumptions up and actually solve it a different way.
Questions? Tim? Go for it.
I guess my question's primarily for Dan and Mr. White or Mr. Wheatley. Feel free to chime in as well. But I'm sure you'd consider, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you'd consider wholesale demand response participation to be a competitive service. Is that correct?
It's a capacity product and also participates at times in the energy market. I have reservations about, I've actually wrote the Commission's comments on demand response to the FERC, and obviously back when I worked here, we had reservations about demand response compensation and whether it was overcompensated.
Yeah,
and I still have that feeling.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with it. Is the regulated utilities in Ohio have legislatively mandated peak demand reduction programs that they then bid into the wholesale market to the extent that they can, and those revenues are used to offset the cost of the programs. Would the OCC be opposed to netting those revenues or requiring the utilities to bid those demand reductions into the market because it's a competitive service?
I personally believe all demand response should participate directly in the market to begin with, through aggregators or through going through the EDU just allows for another layer of compensation that exceeds market prices, and I think it's inefficient. And demand response should be participating directly in wholesale markets, and that everybody will benefit through that participation throughout the grid, or at least through the LDA that's the customer's located. Is that a fair answer?
Yes, it is, and obviously this commission is kind of hamstrung by the fact this is a legislative mandate, not a commission mandate.
Mm-hmm. But that's my belief is that demand response should participate at the wholesale level as generation or capacity product. It has value. Whether it has the same value as a generator, I question, which is available 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. And a couple years ago, the summer product and demand response got the same payment and only had to deliver 60 hours a year. So that seems very telling to me.
Nope. Howard?
I just want to follow up on the earlier conversation on the batteries. Commissioner Conway gave the example of what if we have a battery that basically can serve two functions. It can serve the function of making a distribution either more reliable or more efficient, and it also can be used competitively. And Matt, did I understand your answer is that if you have a combination service, your suggestion was, well, that's fine. That's something that could be bid out, and then you wouldn't have to use ratepayer money, either the capital to invest it or taking the risk that it may or may not be a good asset over time. And if first of all, if that's the correct a correct summary of your answer, then I have the trick question for you. Where do we draw the line? At what percentage will we say this is enough competitive that it ought to go out to the market for bid as opposed to stay with the utility?
Thank you for the question. One of the things that I've been very fortunate enough to see in a number of states that we operate in is different ways that competitors can bring choice and options to the market, whether they're historically an energy company or a technology company or a manufacturing company. If I come back to your question around what's the best way to solve for certain needs, it comes down to the use case. And if I think about if a use case is there's an area of the grid that lacks the appropriate around-the-clock robustness that could be improved by allowing a rate-based case funded distribution system investment in traditional sense, and that should be it. If that's not the most appropriate manner, I think making sure there's open competition to companies like us, and Direct Energy would love to go into areas ever in Ohio, either with the many thousands of business customers we have, or on kind of other land, and say we will work out the right assets to build and sell that reliability service to multiple parties, whether it's a single or many customers, whether it's the utility to solve a distribution need or whether it's the wholesale markets. So I think there are market participants with capital and technology willing to come in and solve those outside of just the substation, because a storage unit is a fantastic option in many use cases, but the parameters aren't identical to a substation and vice versa. And so I think it's around, it depends on what the answer to your question is. If it's, should a utility participate in wholesale markets, my answer is, that wouldn't appear to me to fit the Ohio or PJM kind of construct. If it's, would companies like mine be willing to invest in battery storage and other technology and be held accountable for the results of it? Absolutely.
I just want to take you down one level of detail, and that is, assuming that we find we ask the utilities to go out there and build or design the most efficient systems that you can, and then the question becomes, who makes the investment, who puts the dollars in, who earns the return, and whether this is going to be competitive or whether this is going to be a cost of service type investment.
Yeah.
And I guess my question for you is that, do you have any rules of thumb, either in dollars or in percentages, where you can say, you go clearly here, if it's a de minimis competitive service and a majority utility service, it ought to go one way, or if it has more than X percent or X dollars, it should go the other. Do you have any rules of thumb or examples in other jurisdictions where we've approached the bidding process?
I think some of the comments that Matt from IGS made, resonated with me around, it's really important for us to have a modern grid. And so as it relates to kind of poles, wires, substations, and traditional kind of revenue grade meters, I think those things are wholly appropriate for the utility to participate in and should. I think anything beyond that, I think you risk some of the issues around blurring the line between a car driver and a traffic cop, and frankly, stifling innovation. I think about, if the U.S. Postal Service, was the best person to innovate around mail, they'd have invented kind of Hotmail and Gmail and other things firsthand. And so, no, I think, my view would be, if it's a physical investment in the existing, infrastructure, then that's the utility. If it's not that, then let customers in the market solve it and put a price on reliability that the market can respond to.
Okay. Tom?
So, power forward, modernizing the grid, focusing on the customer. So all three of you focus on the customer, and hopefully we always focus on the customer also. But I was struck by a little bit of both the Matts talking about being market driven and the roles of regulators and such, and particularly because you operate in several states, both of you. Do you have anything to tell us in regards to, what you wish? You're market driven. We have less solar here. The market's, people aren't clamoring, or a lot of people are not. Some people are, of course. We think more will be wanting to use solar, these type things. But, and a slew of other things that you have available for the consumers. But is there anything that you think that, gee, I wish Ohio would do to allow us to, be better, do a better job for the customer than what we're doing now? And I mean, I'm thinking about just like a couple of things. I don't want to be here all afternoon, but are there some main things that you think that we ought to be doing that we're not doing?
Thank you for the question. I'll keep my comments brief to make sure other people comment too. If I think around the concept of economically stranded or fallow assets, it's a great concept, and thank you for sharing that with me. It applies very much behind the meter, and we see that. So in other jurisdictions, you might have, for example, there's a fitness and spa center we worked with, and they're very concerned about making sure their power was always on for the members. And we thought about and designed for them, solar panels on the roof, a CHP unit which produces both electricity and heat, as well as a standby generator. And before we kind of installed all that generation, we did some energy efficiency and put lights in. That customer chose to kind of right-size all its equipment based on making sure it could self-consume, because the ability for it to participate in any excess generation it could otherwise kind of give to the grid as benefit wasn't there. And so if you incentivize market participants who would otherwise have the physical room and capital appetite to upsize their cogeneration unit or solar generation, providing that they know it can fairly economically participate, I think is a good market construct, anywhere in the country. So I think about what are the really appropriate net metering rules? What are the really appropriate kind of access rules? Particularly if you've got multiple on-site generation. If you've got a customer that wants to be on competitive supply because it follows its risk appetite and wants solar and maybe CHP, how do you ensure that any excess electricity that comes from behind that meter, whichever the source, can be properly kind of valued? That to me could be something very powerful to really encourage the proliferation. Because as I said earlier, we talk about these energy assets like they're assets. It comes back to customers, and customers want these assets not just for the electricity, but sometimes for the sustainability or the carbon reduction or the resiliency. And so if you allow them to build multiple assets and say, yes, we're willing to buy the excess out of it, that's fantastic. So don't have an economic barrier at the meter point is going to be really critical.
And I can answer your question. I think the commission is starting to do this, but I think having the utility and having the commission have a laser focus on distribution only and not getting into these other, you know, other non-distribution products and services would be very helpful. Just as an example, if you look at Texas, where they have, you know, there is a very strong barrier where the utility is truly a lines and wires company, but they also have full smart meter deployment. They have the data that's available to the suppliers, the generation suppliers, the customer data, and you're seeing a lot of different innovative products and services coming out of that market, stuff that we're not seeing in Ohio, and part of it is because, you know, we don't. In Ohio, the commission spends a lot of time focusing on, you know, ESPs and PPAs, and, you know, and they don't spend as much time. And I know that it's starting to shift, but a true updating the grid, modernizing the grid, focusing on services the grid can provide from customers. So I would say keep the utility as a distribution company and focus on that.
Commissioner, if I may, I mentioned this in my presentation, but I firmly believe the Commission should be promoting competitive markets where competitive markets make sense, and we should be working to prevent the monopoly reach into the home. If you have customer-funded services after the meter, you will destroy competition, you will destroy innovation, and you'll reconstitute a monopoly, because no one can compete against free. If the customers fund those services, it's going to drive innovation and competition out of the market. Commissioner Conway and I have been dealing with utilities moving to a market space since the mid-1980s. And one of the best things that ever happened to customers in the telephone arena was getting the monopoly out of the home. You had a plethora of services after that that were better and at lower cost to customers. And putting the monopoly back in the home, I think, is the wrong direction.
Larry?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I think I'm just going to have one question for Dan, if you don't mind, Dan.
Yes, Commissioner.
Direct your attention to your slide 3, second bullet point, where you indicate that markets, instead of monopoly, should be used to drive innovation and lower prices.
Yes, Commissioner.
Would you consider, rather than lower prices, to provide net value? Because as we talk about grid
Is your mic on?
Sorry. Sorry, I'll repeat it quickly. Dan's slide 3, second point, he references lower prices as being lower competition. And as we talk about grid modernization, there may be instances in which lower prices aren't necessarily the result, but a net value to customers is. And I'm just concerned about the myopic focus on lower prices.
Commissioner, I understand. I think that's a great question, and I need to clarify. Obviously, if you do a cost-benefit analysis and it provides more value, we wouldn't oppose it. I mean, it would be hard to oppose. But when it comes to the smart grid, we believe that it's a monopoly, and you still need to use the just and reasonable, used and useful. There needs to be cost-benefit analysis as to whether the money being spent is providing value, overall value to customers. And I would agree with you that if you could demonstrate, if everybody, we can all demonstrate that there's true value being provided, and it can be quantifiable. That's one of the problems we've had. We don't know if it is quantifiable. We've said that in several of the smart grid proceedings.
And your response is quantifiable as the exclusive measurement?
I don't,
without
with all due respect, I don't know what else we would use.
Without any consideration of qualitative attribute? I mean, the answer is yes or no. It's okay.
We are very hesitant to endorse qualitative evaluations. We deal with that in the MRO, and we're constantly wondering if it is truly providing value.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Beth?
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of link the previous panel with your panel a little bit. So we heard that the meter is an artificial barrier. We heard that the utilities can be innovative, the distribution utility, that they want to be innovative, they want to play in that space. We also heard that that somebody suggested that perhaps we should look at it as the reliability-facing infrastructure should be viewed as more monopoly service, and the customer facing should be viewed as competitive. I guess I'm kind of wanting to put a finer point on the role that the electric distribution utility, in your view, should have in enabling the development of innovative products in the retail market. So if anybody wants to comment on that.
Consistent, Commissioner, thank you, great question. Consistent with my presentation, we believe the utility, the monopoly, should be a conduit, and its services should be offered on a cost of service basis. If the utility wants to get into competitive space, it should do so under a shareholder-funded company established at the parent level. On equal footing with everybody else, there you'll get true competition, you'll get true innovation, and you'll get the economies you need to have lower prices or better valued products, Commissioner. Oh, and I also need to clarify, when I said MRO, it was ESP versus MRO analysis. I was not criticizing the MRO. Okay. I need to go back a step. Thank you.
I think it's just going back to my initial message is that the competitive services, it's important to keep them truly competitive. I do think there's a lot of unintended consequences when you have utility provided services that aren't natural monopoly services. I think it's an extra cost to ratepayers, and also it harms the market because it makes it much more difficult for competitive providers that want to go in and provide those services to compete when you have an entity with vertical market power also providing those services in a market. So just look at it if it's an essential service. It's truly a natural monopoly utility service, yes. All other stuff, competitive.
I go back to my my iPhone analogy. I think making sure that open protocols and open platforms with transparent and clear access, so developers and capital investors can say, I understand the market, it's level, it's fair, and I'm going to participate and build stuff the customer wants. I think is what it comes down to. And so I think taking that kind of open platform with transparency is really key. And if utility does choose to compete in the fashion that's been described by Dan, then providing they're doing it on a level playing field with Direct Energy or Amazon or IGS or anyone else, I think is what it comes down to. So I think open, transparent market access is really key.
Okay, Hishu, Christina?
Just real quick, and kind of to the battery discussion before, or more broadly, Matt, to a non-wires alternative. Right now, outside of kind of settlement discussions, we don't really have a formal process for engaging that discussion.
Yeah.
And I would argue that the natural incentive is for the traditional investment by the utility. I mean, part of this project is kind of looking at, should there be a formal process for that? And if so, how do you frame that? It just, at a high level, if you have any comments on that.
Christine, just to reframe, is the question, should there be a formal non-wires alternative in Ohio? Why not? See if the market responds. That was the sentiment thrown out there earlier. If you think about what is a non-wires alternative, it's a very, very clear, transparent process to say the grid and market has a need for, increasing reliability in very specific geographic areas, and put a time-bound response on there to say, we'd like to see a response to solve this issue. You can always then see what response the market comes back to, in regard to that. And I think they will respond, providing there's a belief that there's an ability to kind of win business and participate. If it's just an ideas forum or a qualification prospect, markets don't like to respond to that. But if there's a real belief that it's a true process that can result in them bringing value to customers, I think sure, why not?
Sorry, now that triggered a question from my side, which is, I will keep hearing about the utility being in charge of reliability and safety. So now if you open that business and the utility wants to deploy an asset, you're objecting to that asset because it may have some anti-competitive issues. So you open it for competition, you get someone like Direct Energy to bid on that battery, and you build it, you own it. Now there's a reliability issue because of that battery later on, a year later. Do I blame the utility or do I blame you? You are not the electric distribution system. someone else is in charge of the of operating that electric distribution system. The utility will then say, would they have the right to say, well, we don't own this asset, so go after the Direct Energy. But at the same time, Direct Energy, you're not an electric distribution utility in Ohio.
Thank you for the question. So one of the great things, and I find myself so fortunate that I get to speak to so many customers in different states. Just recently, I was at a pharmaceutical company that were in discussions about developing stuff. And when we talked to them about safety and reliability, do you know who they thought was in charge of safety and responsibility? They were. They said, this is our plant, this is our business, that our employees and our customers, we as a business are responsible for safety. And so we sat there and talked to them about, can we help you participate in that agenda? Above and beyond mandated safety, standards like, NFP 110 or building code, they want to go above and beyond that. They want to make sure that their processes are safe, their employees are safe, their stock is safe. So the customer themselves view themselves as a steward of their own safety and wanting to shop around the market and choose who could help them with it. And in that scenario, it's a fantastic conversation for us to have as a provider to say, once we understand what that customer is trying to achieve, we can help them participate. And some of those kind of safety-driven or reliability-driven assets have value. We can help them monetize so they're not, in furlough or they're not economically stranded. So I do think companies like us can absolutely help, our customers with their safety agenda.
And can I just add something there too? Is that customers every day are already and doing more and more things that add to safety or to add reliability to the grid or add reliability, whether that's adding backup generation or participating in demand response. We're already in an environment where customers, non-regulated businesses are participating in grid reliability services. And I'm going back to talking about how over time the justification for maintaining a natural monopoly market erodes. We are starting to see that happen where their market forces are going to be more and more of a player in keeping the lights on. More and more of a player in keeping the grid reliable. I think one of the creative solutions Matt brought up is just another iteration of that trend.
I'm sorry, maybe I didn't make myself clear. I wasn't talking about customer-owned assets. I'm talking about an asset that is in front of the meter that generally is traditionally owned by an electric utility distribution company. So those are the ones who are in charge of reliability of safety, according to all of you. Mm-hmm. So now you are competing and you deploy a battery, you win a contract, you deploy a battery in front of the meter that is generally the distribution system, not at the customer premise. So does that mean we need to make you an electric distribution utility in Ohio? Because now you have gotten involved in distribution reliability of the entire distribution grid.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think about maybe the market construct differently, and clearly you have tremendous expertise that certainly outrival mine. From my simplistic perspective, I think a couple of things. If the utility sets its electrical code and interconnection standards and is very clear about the requirements, has reasonable kind of technical due diligence around what assets may or may not connect and how it intends to perform, I think that tends to be enough. I think about, there's a parallel to the generation industry. There are thousands and thousands of megawatts of centralized plants out there that have very high standards they must meet in terms of, whether natural gas or coal or nuclear. There are standards they have to do. Sure, an outcome is they produce safe, reliable power, but there's a market construct already to make sure that assets that participate for whatever reason, whether it's generation or distribution or transmission, are kind of safe. So I don't think you could say we need to use the utilities capital and innovation and market participation to make sure that the technical side is safe, because I think you can just go direct to what you want to do. If you want to say the commission and the utility has a role in defining what is safe and upholding a code, then that's fantastic. And I think most market participants would welcome very clear electrical, natural gas and other safety standards to which they have to adhere.
Okay, so let me just ask a few questions. Matt, appreciated your presentation. I'm sure the four gentlemen on the bench that have seen two industries through deregulation. Appreciated the slide. What is a utility and what is a monopoly? Larry, Hisham, Dan, and Howard. But I think, let me just provide some commentary around your presentation first, and then let me ask you some very specific questions about your business and your industry, and also for Matt Wheatley as well. So I think part of the dynamic that we're trying to create here is a very customer-centric focused dynamic. And the battle of old, and it's not that far in the distant past, of competitors versus EDUs is, at least in my mind, a battle of the old, okay? Now, what we are really looking at through this proceeding is how are we going to better the lives of human beings, Ohioans, and businesses in the state? If your answer to that question is just make everything behind the meter competitive, then I accept your presentation for what it is, okay? I don't think that anyone at any point over the three phases, including the EDUs, have stated that they wanted a monopoly behind the meter. So that conceptually espoused to us is not even something that's on the table, okay? So throw that aside, all right? What we're interested, what I want to do now is just delve into the retailer business model, okay? Because the question that I want to have answered is the retailer going to be the agent of change presently and in the future? Because the reality is that for both of you, you don't have like an R&D center, right?
We do.
That's true.
You do.
We do.
You
We
do.
have
You both do.
Innovation lab, yes. I mean,
Okay, how big are these R&D centers? What's the and the type of activity that you're doing there? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure, happy to. So we have a number. So the first type, as it relates to behind the meter assets, in the last kind of 2 years, we've opened a factory in New Jersey that assembles and builds cogeneration units and standby generation units. And we have product developers there, as well as in the UK, looking at how can we continually make these offerings more efficient. And we use a lot of monitoring and equipment in real time, so we can balance and optimize how that kind of asset performs. We also secondarily, we own Panoramic Power, which is an Internet of Things device level analyzer, and we spend millions of dollars every year and have a team of, I guess, and I can come back to the commission with an exact answer, about 50 people in that division whose job it is to help us think about, all right, how do I get more types of data into this real-time system? How can I build machine learning in the cloud and tell businesses and organizations what that means for that offering? We own and develop our own set of connected home devices. So we have a smart thermostat, we have smart light bulbs, we have smart alarm systems that we've invested heavily in. I'm not at discretion to say the dollars, but you can imagine it's a serious and significant undertaking. And even in traditional services, in many of our jurisdictions, we choose to give apprentices and undertake our own thorough training, for example, in solar, in other areas. Right now in North America, we are building what we're calling an integrated services platform for businesses, where we can install a platform that they've got web and mobile access to and can see in real time what that on-site generation is doing, what that on-site consumption is doing, and what that costs them. And so we are not, the days, I agree with your dynamic entirely. If we want customers to continue to choose us, they want to see digital technology because it's real, and customers, consumer experiences shape their business expectations. They want to see cheaper and real generation. And I'll give you an example. Even just in the humble cogeneration unit that relies on a reciprocating engine, that engine's the same as it's been as 100 years. But that's true in a Mercedes-Benz. It's the same engine as it was 100 years ago, but the car and the experience is completely different because of the advances in monitoring and electronics. So we choose on physical assets, digital assets, and service to invest very heavily. And then lastly, digital platforms are really key to us. I think you have to engage customers where they want to be engaged, and surfacing data, billing information and online experiences for both B2B and residential to interact with us in a different manner is really key. So we take our investment very, very seriously.
Matt.
Sure. I think that one of the things, what I mentioned, our innovation lab, is we are looking at products and services that customers want, right? So we're not there, inventing products. But what we are doing is looking closely at how do we commercialize a product that someone else has invented, and I think that's a very important role because there's plenty of great ideas out there, right? And we're also, as an example, I'm going back to the smart water heaters. We partnered with an individual that created that technology, and they needed someone to get that technology to customers and find a way to commercialize it, and someone that's willing to take the risk to economic risk to put that out in the market. So that's really what we're focusing on, and we do have a specific department in our business that looks at exactly that. We have dollars allocated to those products and services. A significant amount of the money that we earn goes back into deploying capital to develop CHP, solar, or other kinds of energy efficiency infrastructure. So that's kind of how we see it play out in the market.
So Matt, let me use Matt White. Let me use what you guys do as an example. So I'll continue to call a third-party tech provider, has an amazing piece of tech that is going to, we'll just use the broad policy piece, better the lives of Ohioans. They basically partner with you, and then you try and figure out how to deploy and monetize that for the betterment of the both of you.
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask you a question? It's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
Are you middlemen? I mean, Matt Wheatley, not necessarily, right? Because you actually have your own R&D lab, okay? Matt, you're monetizing what other entities are able to put together for the betterment of customers. And so then we've got, and the retail community is a wide spectrum of folks like Direct, IGS, and then folks on the other side of the spectrum that, we are, policing for, bizarre customer retention practices. Okay, so you've got a broad swath here. So, there's two pieces I want to explore because it's important to the marketplace that we create in the grid mod space. So piece one is, are you middlemen, and thus then are you actually essential to the advancement in grid mod? All right, number one. And then number two, as we advance in this space, what happens to the retail community? Because as you well know, in the retail space, part of my goal has been getting you to think just beyond the commodity, right? Into some of these services that will provide, proven economic net value to customers. So, can you address those two questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to address the questions. And so first of all, I think the retail community will be essential to achieving the goals of grid mod and rolling out new technologies. And when you say, are you middlemen? I mean, we play a role in all areas of the spectrum. You have upstream, you downstream, you have midstream. And just as an example, we just started a unit called IGS Construction, right? And the goal of IGS Construction is to help deploy the infrastructure technologies, whether that be LED lighting, whether that be, installing solar panels on people's roofs, whether that be installing CHP units. All of these things are what, IGS Construction is doing. But we're not manufacturing the solar panels, right?
Yeah, but I buy what you're saying, actually, because you've got a home which could have, there's multiple pieces of tech functionality that could serve to better serve to better those customers' lives, right? And
Yes.
so who is going to be that individual or that entity that can actually deploy full service all of these things in order to create the most net value?
Yeah, and if you look,
that's what you're saying,
yeah,
essentially.
if you look
Okay.
at Amazon, we've thrown around Amazon a lot. Most of the things you buy on Amazon are not made by Amazon. Amazon is part of the value stream. You know, they're in the middle of the value stream in some instances. Some instances they're not. You know, the Amazon Echo, they manufacture that, but there is a role to play for every player in that value stream. But I also think you have to have multiple players in that value stream, bringing products and services to customers. And I go back to the smart water heater. You know, there might be research labs that, you know, it's a great idea. It would be awesome if every customer had that, but how is every customer going to get that? You know, just because there's an idea out there, that even if it's the best idea in the world, it doesn't automatically get into the hands of the customer, and it automatically does not turn into a viable business model.
Yeah, I get it. I absolutely buy that. So then, can we get to the next question about
Sure.
sort of like the future of the competitive retail industry, and if everyone is talking about just this exponential change, it's happening year after year after year after year. Okay, so the retail community as it exists today, there are some folks that I think we would deem to be household names. Okay, and then there are a number of others. What do you see happening without disparaging your fellow, if you're the fellow members of your retail community? I mean, what do you see happening in this space? How should we be viewing the collective retail community? As a collective, or are you now individual companies with your own set of goals, your own product lines, your own partnerships? What should be the lens? What should be the lens of this body? And that's why I was partially, you and I are friends, so I hope it's okay that I did that. I was partially critical of your presentation because it doesn't do what you're doing justice. I mean, yes, we know that there's a difference between the monopoly and the competitive retail, and we know what the damage of potentially advancing a monopoly behind the meter could be. Okay, so tell me about, you guys and what your community looks like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and how we have to view that changing dynamic within your own community.
So our community, I can't predict the future, but what I do think will happen is that it's definitely going to be beyond the commodity. I think if you look at the analogy of the telecom community, you had the period where you're like 9 cents a minute, 10 cents a minute, nights and weekends. We're moving out of that period right now in the electric, where we're just going from a price per kWh to what is the value that we can provide to the customer as a whole. I think for a retailer to thrive in that environment, and I think a lot won't, they have to be long-term focused. They have to be willing to invest capital to develop diverse range of products and services for customers, and they have to be thinking beyond just the 9 cents a kWh, 10 cents a kWh, and trying to create that holistic customer relationship. What I think from the Utilities Commission perspective we need, which I think is that you have to let that happen organically and not say, well, we think it should be this way or that way, or this is the way we think a retailer should look, because they are going to grow. IGS started off as a gas company 30 years ago, and all we did was serve large gas customers. My grandfather founded the company. He would probably roll over in his grave if he found out we were installing rooftop solar on people's roofs. So I can't tell you exactly what a retailer is going to look like in 10 years, but what I think is essential is for the regulators to allow those businesses to grow organically and allow those businesses to offer a more diverse range of products and services in a competitively neutral manner.
Very good. Matt, Wheatley, anything?
It's a very thoughtful kind of question. I can think about how we see ourselves in the future, which is, I think about at the core of what Centrica does is the customer, and we're an energy and energy services company. And if I think about what that means, it means we are involved and invest physically and financially in upstream, in wholesale, in retail and advisory, in insights, data innovation as it relates to energy projects and energy efficiency. And so for our view, we see our ability to be a supplier as a way to kind of bring that together economically and settle it to the customer. So just to be really clear on that, there's customers we talk to that would say, hey, we'd really like to do a lighting project. In this warehouse we operate, we've got T8s and T12s, and they're all old. Can you replace them by LED? They don't use their capital for light bulbs or their effort or to make sure it's the right lumens or the right Kelvin. But we can do a lighting as a service contract that's either kind of funded and settled through their retail bill, or not. And so we see our evolution as doing as much as we can, like with the customer. And a lot of those things we do in terms of projects and R&D, some of that technology is our own because we feel so passionate about it and feel like we've got value to add that we manufacture that technology ourselves, and sometimes we don't. So for example, we don't manufacture solar panels. We think it's a vibrant market and we can acquire the panels we need, but we do manufacture cogeneration units because we think we've got an added advantage there. And so I think our participation is going to vary over the time. I think as it relates to the retail piece of that, it's highly important for it to be well organized and regulated. I think it's you have to make sure that participants are not going to let down customers because it gives the industry a bad name. And making sure you hold a high bar as it relates to the vetting and standards that we adhere to is really key. And so, as it relates to that, that point where the physical and the financial can come together, it's going to evolve, and I'm sure the commission can evolve with it. Yeah,
I mean, I generally speaking view some of you apart from the body, and it'll be interesting to see as this world develops. I do have one more question, and Dan, I'll give you the first crack at this. So let us say that we maintain the current rubric for the competitive marketplace for, we'll call it the grid mod marketplace, and we allow for an unregulated EDU affiliate to participate in the marketplace. Okay, whatever, call it whatever, utility, home services, LLC. Okay, give me 2 bullet points of what the commission, in learning from our difficulties from the past, 2 bullet points that we should keep in mind if that's in fact the marketplace we create.
The first that comes to mind is, was this going to be a structurally separate company or an affiliate?
Yeah.
Well, if it's structurally separate, you don't need the accounting safeguards, and my bullet would be that would be the best route to go. Separate company, established at the holding company level. If you have an affiliate company, which in telephone you used to refer to that as non-accounting safeguards and accounting safeguards. Non-accounting safeguards were better because you had a separate company. That's what I would advocate. And everybody needs to purchase under the same terms and conditions on an equal footing. No special contracts for the affiliate. That would be my 2 bullets.
Matt?
I would agree with Dan. Fully separate company, similar to how it's organized in Texas, and a platform that allows individuals to engage and offer innovative products and services to customers in an equal playing field.
Matt Wheatley?
No comments to add.
Okay. I'm sorry. Final question. What do we do with Amazon, Tesla, Apple, Google, who are not going to be selling a commodity? They're not going to be selling the commodity. They're only selling products, but they're related to power. They have to be installed on the D system, potentially. What do we do with these folks?
I think they are already partnering with a lot of retail providers that are, selling commodity. They're finding ways to engage, and I always hate going back to Texas because I know some of you all get annoyed by it, but there are some great partnerships with the Googles of the world in offering a diverse range of products and services to customers. I think eventually some of them will vertically integrate.
1 second, Larry wants me to rephrase, and I think it makes total sense. Should they, without a retailer, be able to offer products and services to the end user?
I think they should. I don't think, like I said, if it's behind the meter, there's nothing that should stop Google from putting in a solar panel or a battery in customers' homes. I don't think behind the meter stuff should should be regulated by the commission. I do think there should be consumer protection that is available through the general consumer protection laws. But I don't think you should require a provider of DG. Just because you install DG doesn't mean you need to be certified at the PUCO, if that's the question you're answering.
I think 2 points for me. And the first would be, I think as it relates to utility and meter data, data protection and licensing, I think if any company, whether they're a well-branded tech company or a startup, chooses to participate in that, they should be managed and upheld to the same standards as everyone else. Or if existing retail suppliers choose to kind of go beyond that, then they should be able to compete openly as well. So I think it's just a level playing field. I think my second point would be, you asked about what can we do differently to make sure that unevenly distributed future can come to Ohio. It's three things. The one would be have EDCs publish maps and visibility over where substations have additional capacity where they could soak in generation. And also conversely, where are the substations under a real threat where the market could address it? So constant digital visibility over here needs more demand or less demand, or more generation or less generation. The second thing is clear interconnection and other standards for everyone that are not a black box, clear approvals that our companies, as well as some of those you mentioned, can get through. Then good net metering, no fallowed assets behind the meter, that if you've got an asset that can overproduce and benefit the grid, you give that to everyone. With those three things that everyone has clear access to, let everyone compete.
And again, the three things were the clear playing field, the level playing field.
Map and visibility over which substations have capacity to add generation against or need relief, because the market could solve that. Yep. Oh, I see, substation B, it's in trouble, 8 p.m. to 12 p.m., like, we'll solve that.
Yep.
Second thing is very clear interconnection and other standards with a very clear process that if I've got an asset like a solar panel and I want to interconnect, like, there's a clear, visible process with much quicker SLAs around how quickly I can get that connected to the grid. And the third thing is great net metering rules around if I've got an asset that produces behind the meter that could produce more and give it back to the grid, it's very clear about how it economically participates.
We're taking notes. Really good job. Really, really good job. Thank you for fielding some tough questions. Okay, we're behind again, but let's see. We're supposed to be back here at 1:45. Oh, we have a commission meeting at 1:30. Woo!
Sorry.
Okay, so we'll be back at 1:30. We've already noticed the meeting. We'll be back at 1:30.